everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're new here, my name is Dana Trupiana and I cover infamous gangsters every week in a true crime-like format. My show, Mob Times, comes out on Tuesdays, and on podcast it comes out on Wednesdays, so depending on where you're listening, if this is new, it's probably one of those 2 days. So we are now on part 4 of Stefano Magaddino. Magaddino is a pretty unique case in a few different ways, and that makes it really interesting to make this video, or in this case, an entire series of videos about him in particular. The first way that he's unique is that there is no official documentation available online about Stefano Magaddino. There's no FBI documents that you're able to refer to, there's no official police paperwork, there is nothing that can be referenced to verify any facts or any information either way, whether it's true or not. So a lot of the information that I've been giving you guys, I've been giving it to you from multiple different sources of information that I found out there, but unfortunately, because the FBI paperwork doesn't really exist, I can't really confirm 100% either way whether it's true or not. Another way that he is unique as a gangster is that he is somebody that I've actually covered in the past. I took the video down, but the cool thing is that because I made a video about him in the past, I already had the groundwork laid for him. So now I just get to dig way, way deeper in instead of getting all of the surface level information about him the way that I would for any other gangster. So let's do a quick recap of last week's episode and then we'll just keep on trucking along with Mr. Stefano Magaddino. Now, at the beginning of last week's episode on part 3 of Stefano Magaddino, one huge lesson that we learned was very simple. Never talk to the police. Bartolo Fontana learned that lesson the hard way when he was supposedly forced to kill his best friend by Magaddino's gang, what we refer to now as the Good Killers, but at the time they referred to themselves as the Bonventre gang. Apparently, Fontana was forced to kill his best friend 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐄𝐎 by them. I went into 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐄𝐎 and his murder pretty heavily in part 2 and 3, so if you're interested, go check out those 2 parts. I'm not going to go over it again. All I'm going to say here is that Fontana killed him, and then he went to the police, and not only did he give all of the information about the murder, but he solved a bunch of cold cases that were outstanding, pinning it on the Good Killers gang. He even set up a sting with the police in order to get Stefano Magaddino to a place where the police would easily be able to arrest him. So he works pretty closely with the police. Now, even though Fontana gave up everything to help the police, what ended up happening? The Good Killers were let free a day or 2 later. No official charges were ever filed on any one of them, but Fontana wasn't so lucky. Because he trusted police, and because he disclosed to them that he did commit the murder, albeit against his own will, Bartolo Fontana would be the only person that would be charged with 𝐂𝐶𝐂𝐃𝐏𝐿𝐶𝐿 murder, and he would spend the rest of his life in prison for it. Fontana told police everything about the Good Killers. He divulged that they were broken down into gangs that were about 15 dudes per gang, but the same way that the mafia is now, those crews or those gangs, they all fell into the Bonventre gang. So the same way that you've got like the Gambino family, and then there's crews in the family, same thing here. 15 was their magical number because that is the number of cold cases that Fontana actually handed police and told them like, hey, these are cold cases, you've never figured them out, but it was the Good Killers that committed these murders. When the Bonventre gang or the Good Killers gang, whatever you want to call them, when they were arrested and they were let go a day or 2 later, everybody knew that it was over. That was it. They couldn't really stay anymore, and a lot of them decided to hightail it out of New York City. Stefano Magaddino headed up north, setting up a permanent shop in Buffalo, New York. There was a family there that had been established by Giuseppe DiCarlo, and less than a year after Magaddino arrived to Buffalo, the boss of the family, DiCarlo Sr., would die of natural causes. Now Magaddino, at only 31 years old, would be given the position of boss of the family. He took the role on as boss as a very temporary thing, and he made it very clear he did not want to be the boss of the family. He didn't want this position long term. The rest of the family and the leadership of the family kind of insisted that he hold on to it. They didn't want to put anybody else in place, especially since the only other person that was eligible for it was Giuseppe DiCarlo's son, Joseph DiCarlo, who was around 23 years old at the time, and it showed. So they decided to give it to Magaddino instead, but Joe DiCarlo did not take this lightly. He took it personally that he was passed up for the job, and things were very icy between him and Magaddino for a long time. Joe DiCarlo felt like it was his birthright to be given the position of boss of the family, since it had been his father that created the Mafia family in the first place in Buffalo. But the other leaders of the family in Buffalo, they felt that he was too young, too inexperienced, and too immature to be given that kind of responsibility, so they said no, and they gave it to Magaddino instead. Magaddino wanted no part of it. He didn't want to be boss, but they put the burden on him, so he ended up taking it. But because he didn't want this position, he ended up delegating a lot of power and responsibility out. And the Buffalo family fell into place pretty quickly. But the relationship between him and DiCarlo, it would remain icy for a long time. And we're all caught up. Let's keep moving. So figure now we're sitting somewhere around the mid-1920s, figure like 1924, 1925, and there's two major events going on at the time. And we talked about this last week a lot, but let's just glaze through it real quick. The first event is Prohibition in America. In part 3, we went over how the American Mafia was pretty much created by Prohibition. Well, when did Prohibition take place? Right around this time. Prohibition was put into place in 1920, and it ended in 1931. So we're right dab smack in the middle of Prohibition right now. As far as Prohibition goes, Magaddino and Al Capone were probably the two biggest earners of the entire scheme. And yes, that is what Prohibition was. A scheme. They both lived in areas that could access Canada really easily, and both were not afraid to use violence to further their own agenda. Magaddino obviously did it better, since out of the two of them, he would be the one left standing, while Al Capone would go away to Alcatraz. But the two gangsters together, they supplied a huge portion of the liquor that came into the United States. Capone through the Great Lakes, and Magaddino through Niagara Falls. Now, from there, once they were able to get the liquor into America, they would just go and they would supply the speakeasies and the other mafia families who would go on and sell it. So it's not like they were like the biggest sellers of the liquor, they were just the biggest importers. Magaddino also teamed up with the Cleveland Syndicate, and he made really good friends with Mo Dalitz. And Dalitz would use Magaddino's territory and bring in even more alcohol through Buffalo. Of course, Magaddino would be well compensated for his use of his territory. Magaddino had a huge part to play in Prohibition, given that his family was the closest to the Canadian border, which gives Buffalo a unique ability to import alcohol a lot easier than pretty much anyone anywhere. And it gives people access to alcohol that's actual alcohol and not just like moonshine that's made in somebody's bathtub. Because does that do the job? Yes, but do you want to sip on an actual brandy or a whiskey? Yeah, you do. So everything that they imported was always in high demand. Now, another major event going on at this time is ramping up to be the biggest, bloodiest war that we would ever see on American soil between mafia families, the Castellammarese War. Now, I think you guys could possibly deduce why and how this would play such a huge role in Magaddino and in his life. The gangster that came to America from Castellammarese del Golfo and ran the Good Killers, the Castellammarese faction of the mafia while living in New York. So obviously he's gonna have a huge role to play in the Castellammarese War. In his personal life, Stefano Magaddino married Carmela Corrado on October 19th, 1913 in Brooklyn, New York. Magaddino was 23 years old and Corrado was 20 years old, and they would go on to have 3 children together. They had Angeline Carmela LaDuca. This family is probably where Joanne came from. I'm going to talk about her in a few minutes. They would have Peter A. Magaddino and Josephine Montana. He also started building legitimate businesses as well. We already know that he got his nickname Stefano the Undertaker Magaddino from the funeral home that he owned and operated. But he also started operating other companies in the town as well. Magaddino Memorial Chapel, the Power City Distributing Company of Niagara Falls, and Camellia Linen Supply Company of Buffalo were just some of the companies that he opened and operated on his own. Along with the companies and the bootlegging, he started putting a team in place. He assigned John C. Montana as his consigliere, and that was really cool because Montana was a serious dude. He was a former city council member, and he was already in high standing in the town. So it helped a lot to get relationships with legit people. It helped to give him legitimacy just through knowing Montana. It helped further him altogether in this new town that he settled in. Interesting note here that I never noticed until now is that his underboss was John C. Montana, and his youngest daughter would end up with the last name Montana, meaning that his youngest daughter was probably married off to his underboss's kid. So before I move on, I do want to mention that I just noticed that when this video comes out, it's going to be Christmas Eve. I just want to give you guys well wishes. I hope that you guys all get a chance to spend some time with family and you're able to be in a position where you give people stuff that they like and get stuff that you like and just get to spend a lot of time with your family. And I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I hope you enjoy any holiday that you guys celebrate, but I celebrate Christmas, so happy holidays all around. So in the Castellammarese War, obviously, Magaddino was going to support the Castellammarese faction. He would support Salvatore Maranzano, because we know that's who Bonanno supported. And we know that Magaddino and Bonanno are BFFs. So Magaddino obviously stood behind Maranzano. In 1924, Peter Magaddino, who is Stefano's son, he jumps on a Cuban fishing boat and he goes over to Italy with one mission in mind. He picks up his long-lost cousin, Joseph Bonanno. He stows him away in this little Cuban fishing boat that he has, and he takes off with the final destination of Tampa, Florida. Now, Peter was able to get Joseph Bonanno into America through Tampa. The two hop on a train in Tampa and they're headed for New York because, like, who the hell wants to sail the eastern seaboard? Obviously, they're going to get on a train. They don't want to be on the water anymore. So they hop on a train. As soon as they get to New York, they hop off the train. They're ready to get this new life started for Joseph Bonanno. And Bonanno is scooped up by an immigration officer as soon as he steps off the train. He didn't get deported or anything, but he did have to pay $1,000 bail, which, remember, this is 1924. $1,000 is a lot of money. And Bonanno hasn't even exchanged his currency yet. He has nothing. So he's going to be stuck in jail probably indefinitely. Thank God he has people around though, because cousin Stefano steps in and he saves the day. He pays the bail, he gets Bonanno out of jail, and he turns around and he's like, yeah, listen, we're not going to do this. Like, I helped you as a favor for your Uncle Giovanni Bonventre. I've got a rep to protect. Like, don't go around telling people that we're boys. I saved your life. Cool. Don't mention it. Just shut up. Like, I already built a life and a reputation around here. Don't be going around blabbering about how amazing I am for saving you. Shut up. Don't mention it. We're good. But really, they would just spend the rest of their lives being, like, best friends. So it really was just like... But Bonanno did mention in his book that, like, Stefano did tell him, like, shut up. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear about how amazing I am for... Shut up. Whatever. It happened. Move on. So now, we all know how the Castellammarese War played out. If you don't, I reviewed it in a lot of detail in my Gambino episode. There's chapters in that episode, so if you're interested in just hearing about the Castellammarese War and you don't want to hear about everything else, you can go check out those episodes and just click to the chapters that are called Castellammarese War. So I would assume that Magaddino would probably have been a young Turk. He's right about that age. I don't know if people from places outside of New York City took part in the Young Turks, but I would assume they did because Stefano Magaddino played a huge role in this war. So I would assume that he had a part in the Young Turks. The Castellammarese War plays out. Joe the Boss Masseria is killed. Salvatore Maranzano is installed as the Capo di Tutti Capi. And then 6 months later, he is also murked. In the aftermath of that, Magaddino would go on to form a friendship and a bond with Charles Lucky Luciano. We all know who Charlie Lucky Luciano is, but if you don't, he's kind of credited with creating the modern mafia. His whole mission in life was to restructure the mafia into a corporation type of business. He wanted to establish the Commission, a governing body of crime across America. So he created the Commission for the Italian gangs, and then he created the National Crime Syndicate for all the gangs. So the Commission was the Italian Mafia, and then the National Crime Syndicate was the Italian Mafia and the Jewish and the Russian and all of the gangs in the area. I've talked about Luciano at disgusting length. Like, I've talked so much about Luciano on this channel. But I will link the episode that I made about Luciano himself. So if you're interested in learning more about Luciano, go check out the episode that I made about him. But if you've been watching my channel for more than one episode, you know who Charlie Lucky Luciano is. Now, when Lucky Luciano creates this commission, this ruling body of the bosses of the mafia, Stefano Magaddino is given a seat on this commission. It's really significant that Magaddino was given a seat on the commission for a few reasons, but one just kind of made him more special than the other. Like, okay, yeah, every single other person that has a seat on this commission is a freaking boss. Like, you're a very powerful person, right? But the thing that made him special was that he was one of only 2 people on that commission that were bosses of a family outside of New York City. Yeah, obviously the bosses of each of the 5 families in New York City are going to have a seat on this commission, but there's only 2 locations outside of New York City that would get a seat on this immediate commission, the one that was created the day the commission was created. If you've been watching my channel for a while, or if you've watched Boardwalk Empire, or if you have any working knowledge of the mafia at all, you probably know who this is. But if you haven't, you could go ahead and guess. I'll give you a second. It was Buffalo, New York with Stefano Magaddino. And the second was Chicago, Illinois with Al Capone. So now that we have Magaddino officially in charge of the Buffalo Mafia family and also holding a seat on the commission, it's going to provide a huge advantage not only for Magaddino, but for the entire Buffalo family. It provided a whole lot more of a platform to negotiate and be protected on the global scale of the mafia, which is absolutely essential when you have organized crime. Organization is like the whole point. Al Capone is another gangster that I dedicated an entire episode around, but he would end up in jail pretty early for tax evasion. The Chicago gang would go on to commit the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which was a super public execution of multiple people, and it would serve to further the public's belief in the mafia. It made them believe that the mafia was an actual organization, despite every single public official vehemently denying that they exist. Now, while the commission did a lot of meeting around the time that Capone's war was waging on the streets of Chicago, or the idea of the commission even at the same time, at the end of the day, one thing was very clear. Al Capone was not a real mafia gangster. He came from Naples. And the real gangsters, well, they didn't. They came from Sicily. So they viewed Capone as an organization that was completely separate from them. He was completely removed from their own process, so they really didn't step in to control the bloodshed in Chicago until they needed him. Then, he was a real gangster, a real Italian, and he was welcomed onto the commission. Throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, Magaddino's empire thrived. Like, this is the golden age for the mafia. His criminal activities included illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, narcotics trafficking, everything you can think that the mafia was into at the time, Stefano Magaddino was into it. But he was very well known for not living a big flashy lifestyle. Stefano Magaddino never had any ambition to be the John Gotti of his time. He didn't want to wear the super expensive suits and the very flashy jewelry. He lived a very modest life, even compared with other mafia figures at the time. He just didn't want to be all up in the public view because, again, Stefano Magaddino was raised in this. And you'll never find an actual Sicilian mafia member, someone that was born and raised in Sicily, that comes to America and wants to be a celebrity. That's just not what they do. So before we go any further, I do want to circle back real quick, and I want to talk about this for a second, so just indulge me in my little veer off topic. So Magaddino's granddaughter, Joanne LaDuca Rangatore, wrote a book about him. The book was called Stefano Magaddino, A Family Story, and it explores Magaddino's personal and criminal life. The book goes over a lot, and it goes over how he was known to be a devout Catholic man and a family man. Rangatore spends this entire book showing how Stefano Magaddino was a very complex figure. He wasn't just a criminal. He wasn't just this evil mafia man that everybody in the country really knows him as. But he was capable of both brutal violence as well as devotion and loyalty. And he's just not this one-size-fits-all evil gangster that people believe that he is. Now, since Joanne is his granddaughter, she grew up hearing stories about everything. She heard the criminal stories, she heard the family stories, she heard the war stories. She includes quotes from his personal friends, from her own family, and from associates of Magaddino. And it looks at Magaddino in a lot of angles that he's never really been looked at before by anybody covering him before. It covers the criminal aspects of his life as well as the family aspects, the personal relationships, and the impact that he had on his family and the community around him. I talked about this book in the first part of the series because it was written by a girl that has the last name 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐿, and that was something that I share. So that was something that I brought up. My own family tree has 4 significant names in it: Vitale, Trupiana, Galati, and, you guessed it, 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 or 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏. I'm surprised that while writing this book, Joanne didn't dig deeper into Vito 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 and all of his shenanigans, because that's someone I've definitely delved deeper into. But I'm guessing that there's a high likelihood that there's a relationship there. Like, it's very rare for people in that small little area to have the same last name and not have any kind of relation. So because Joanne is Stefano Magaddino's actual granddaughter, she grew up in a family that was raised by Stefano Magaddino, she has access to a lot of intimate family stories, personal insights, things that an outsider would never have access to or be able to share. She also has a very unique perspective because she was raised in an Italian-American family, one that had deep roots in Sicilian traditions, and she has a lot of experience in it. And it comes across in the book that she wrote a lot. Like, this is not a book that was written by some journalist that had no idea what he was talking about. And I talk about this all the time. When I was doing the lives with Tommy Stiggs, I talked about how there's such a huge difference between somebody that's just interested in the mafia, just interested in the history and the glitz and the glam of, like, mafia stories, and somebody who grew up in this culture and this life. Usually, the difference is the level of understanding and empathy towards the gangster that they're talking about. And that makes a huge difference in how any story about any person is told. Joanne understands this. I understand it, but there's a lot of content creators out there that don't. They just don't understand. They don't know why you would be able to support somebody that's done these heinous things. They're interested in the true crime aspect. They're interested in the horrible things that they do. They're retired police officers or journalists or whatever that pique their interest in the mafia, but you're never going to hear the story the same way unless you hear it from the mouth of somebody that literally grew up in a family that was in this culture and all that that entails. So now Magaddino is officially the boss of the Buffalo family, and he goes on to form a partnership with Canada's Rocco Pieri in an alcohol smuggling operation. His relationship with Pieri was something that really helped him in the fight to import alcohol into America during Prohibition. And if we rewind a little bit, we're going to look at former mafia bosses Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio Lupo, and they were released from prison in 1920. Now, when they got out of jail, people got scared because they created the mafia. Like, they invented it. Yeah, Charlie Lucky Luciano would organize it, but Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio Lupo, they created it. They were the first on the ground in New York. Like, they made this shit. And their competition, Salvatore d'Aquila, he knew that. And he put out a hit on both of them, as well as their supporters, Joe the Boss Masseria being one of them. Giuseppe Masseria would emerged to be a huge rival of d'Aquila's, and he would stay in the Morello family and begin leading the Morello family once Morello and Lupo were sent to jail. I believe they went and did their long-term prison sentence for forgery. Not 100% sure on that. Vincent Terranova and Silvio Tagliagamba, the underbosses of the top gangs within the Morello and the d'Aquila families, were killed in a gang war that was being waged between the main leaders of the Morello and the d'Aquila gangs, Joe the Boss Masseria for the Morello side, and Umberto Valente on the d'Aquila side. Now, d'Aquila, he sees that these guys get out of jail and he's like, oh shit, I want them killed. So d'Aquila puts out this hit on all of these guys. He puts out a hit on a lot of guys at once. And one of those guys that he initially put a hit out on was Umberto Valente. But he did end up rescinding the death notice for Umberto Valente pretty quickly. And the situation with Valente, it was very unique because he put out this hit on Valente, and Valente went back to him, and he's like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, I'm your boy, man. I'm your biggest supporter. How could you put out a hit on me? I love you. I would die for you. I will do anything for you. And 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐏 turns around and he's like, all right, cool. You'll do anything for me? Cool. Go take out Masseria. So he sends Valente to take out Masseria and carry out the hit that he put on Masseria's head. Masseria narrowly avoids this assassination attempt, and Valente would end up getting murdered in August of 1922. Now, I do have a few episodes that goes way deeper into this whole situation, but the one that probably goes the furthest into exactly what happened here was the video that I made on Joe the Boss Masseria. That was actually a super interesting snapshot in time of the Mafia, and seeing the situation with Valente play out is actually really interesting, so if you want to learn more about that, go check out the episode that I made about Joe the Boss Masseria. Again, keep in mind that's a very old episode. The quality's not going to be as great, but the information in there is just as valid. Now, after Valente was killed, Masseria becomes the most powerful and most important mafioso in Manhattan, and he supports any of the anti-𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐎 gangsters in Chicago and Cleveland and New York. He supports anybody that does not like 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐿. Joseph and John Lenardo, leaders of the Cleveland Mafia, which Big Joe Lenardo is, I've done an episode on him as well, but these two brothers are killed at Ottavio Perello's barbershop. And this is a big deal. These guys are big names in the Cleveland Mafia. Sam Todaro was Joseph Masseria's ally, and he would emerge as the new leader of the Cleveland underworld. And now, this is another situation that I go very, very deep into in other episodes. I've probably covered the Cleveland Mafia just as much, if not more, than the New York Mafia at this time. If you want to learn more about the whole situation, go check out my episode on Big Joe Lenardo or the 5-part series that I did on Angelo Lenardo, which, if I may toot my own horn real quick, is the first time anybody outside of the Mob Museum has ever gotten a Lenardo on camera. Yes, little old me, Dana Tribbiana. No big deal, but, you know, I did do that. On January 1st, 1924, Joseph DiCarlo attacked and tried to kill Busy Joe Pattiucci. Now, again, I'm not going to go through this entire thing. I've gone through this so in depth in the past. But this is the situation where the guy ratted and lied and poisoned himself and had Todaro get the notebook. I went pretty deep into this situation in my earlier videos. If you want to check out the situation, I'm going to link the DiCarlo episode below. But for purposes of this episode, just know that Joseph DiCarlo was arrested, and he was given a 6-year prison sentence for witness intimidation in the attempted kidnapping of a witness with force of arms. So it's a whole big situation, and this is Joseph DiCarlo, Giuseppe DiCarlo's son, the one that wanted to take on the position of boss of the family. He felt like it was his birthright to take over as boss of the family. Now he's all wrapped up in this Busy Joe Pattiucci murder, and it's looking like it was a very good thing that they chose Magaddino instead of DiCarlo, because this is a whole mess. On December 22nd, 1927, one of the leaders of Buffalo's underworld, Filippo Mazzara, would be shot to death in a borrowed automobile. Joseph Di Benedetto is Masseria's heir apparent, and he becomes the new boss in place of Filippo Mazzara. Now, Mazzara, he's another man from Castellammarese War, so you know he's boys with Magaddino. Like, this is a good thing for Magaddino. He is the dude that Magaddino has been saying all along, like, I don't want to be boss. Let's have Mazzara be boss. I'll be the underboss. I don't want that responsibility. He can be the boss. But now, Mazzara has been killed. And now we have Joseph Di Benedetto that's going to take that spot that Mazzara's death opened up. So now we've got Joe the Boss Masseria, and him and his allies are supporting anybody that is against Salvatore 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐎. The 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 brothers organization, who is in Cleveland, they're being supported by Masseria and his allies because they don't support Salvatore 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐎. And they seem to be working to undermine Magaddino, and they're trying to figure out any way to get rid of the partnership that Magaddino had formed with the Cleveland family, where they were able to come in and get the alcohol through their border. So the 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐎 brothers, they're with Masseria, they're against Magaddino. And it seems like this eventually works out in Joe the Boss Masseria's favor. Mafia capo di tutti i capi Salvatore 𝐂𝐸𝐃𝐄𝐎 was murdered in New York City on October 10th, 1928. Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria is recognized as the new boss of bosses, or capo di tutti i capi, and we inch closer and closer every minute to the Castellammarese War. Now, remember, Joe DiCarlo had been arrested. He was paroled in October of 1928, and he immediately gets right back to it. He re-enters the Buffalo Rackets, and he forms the DiCarlo gang. So there's this constant sense of underlying tension, iciness, and just all-around unfavorability between the DiCarlo gang and the Magaddino operation, which the Magaddino operation is the official mafia in Buffalo and Niagara Falls. But the DiCarlo gang does not see it that way. And that's why you'll hear DiCarlo saying things like, oh, well, eventually you'll know that DiCarlo still runs this city. So things are not going great anywhere in this country when it comes to the mafia. It's just not going great anywhere. Leading up to the Castellammarese War, the mafia and its factions are split probably as deeply as they can be. The silver lining is that no matter how bad and how tense and how icy things get between Magaddino and DiCarlo, it doesn't ever devolve into a war. Remember, Magaddino really never wanted this top spot. He didn't want to be boss. So he's not about to go to war to claim that title that he never wanted in the first place. That's just not going to happen. So no war ever breaks out for the position of boss of the family in Buffalo. But even though DiCarlo has gone and he's done time and he's gone through a whole bunch of criminal charges, this boy's gone through some shit at this point. Doesn't matter. The leadership in Buffalo makes it very clear they will not stand behind DiCarlo as boss of the family. And as much as DiCarlo hates this, as much as his gang hates this and they wish it was different, they can't do anything about that. You need the support of the bosses of Buffalo in order to be the boss of the Buffalo family. So Magaddino, he sees this. He gets the heads up. Yes, we want you to be our boss of bosses in Buffalo. That's all you, bro. The higher ups, they throw their full support behind Magaddino. And when they do that, Magaddino comes out and he's like, all right, listen, I love my second in command, but it's not worth it. I'm gonna take him out and I'm gonna put Joseph DiCarlo in as my second in command. And that does a lot. Putting DiCarlo in as the number 2 in the Buffalo family, it breaks a lot of the tension that's going on. It placates his followers. It makes everybody stop thinking, because they're about to hit the mattresses. They're about to go to war so that Joseph DiCarlo can be put in as the top person in Buffalo. This is a hairpin away from going off, and they don't want that to happen. So when Magaddino comes out and says, listen, I don't want to be boss, but they're making me, so here's what we'll do. I'll stay boss. You be my number 2. I'll get rid of my number 2. He probably put him in as like consigliere or something. But he puts Joseph DiCarlo in as number 2, and the war that was just about to go off, it was seconds away from popping off, it goes away. And now Magaddino and Joseph DiCarlo are able to run Buffalo together. Now, remember before when I said that Filippo Mazzara, which was a really good friend of Stefano Magaddino, he had been killed, and Joseph Di Benedetto had been listed as his heir apparent. And Joseph Di Benedetto had been running his gang all along. But less than a year and a half after being given that top spot and leading that really powerful gang in the Buffalo Mafia, Joseph Di Benedetto was killed on February 27th, 1929. Now 1930 comes around, and where we're sitting is pretty much Stefano Magaddino is the boss of the Buffalo Mafia, Joseph DiCarlo is the number 2, and we've got the Castellammarese War. It's about to start. Like, it's gonna have its official start date in maybe a month or 2. So leading up to when this officially pops off, Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, he is the capo di tutti i capi in New York City, which that means like he's the boss of everywhere. He's the boss of the mafia in America. And he decided in 1930 that Stefano Magaddino and a lot of other Castellammarese mafia leaders in the United States were inciting rebellion against his administration, and he he's not having it. And if I'm being real here, Masseria decided that they were inciting an open rebellion because they were inciting an open rebellion. He was 100% correct. But that's a problem for Joe the Boss Masseria, because as much as he is seemingly bulletproof, this man has been attacked by gunfire more times than anybody can count. He has escaped near-death experiences so many times. He seems invincible. He has the power of the full mafia behind him. But the Castellammarese clan, this consists of some seriously powerful hitters as well. You've got Salvatore Maranzano, Stefano Magaddino, Gaspar Milazzo, Joseph Aiello. Wherever the Castellammarese were, there is also enemies of Joe the Boss Masseria. If there's a million haters of Joe the Boss Masseria, the Castellammarese clan, they're in that million. If there's 10 haters, the Castellammarese are in there. And if there's 0, it means the Castellammarese clan is dead. Because these guys all vehemently hate Joe the Boss Masseria, and they will ally with anybody else that hates him. So what is the logical first step for Joe the Boss Masseria? He puts out a summons, and Stefano Magaddino is summoned to appear before him in New York City. And Magaddino did not heed that summons. He was like, go fuck yourself. I am not going to New York City. Absolutely not. When Magaddino told him to go fuck himself, Masseria sentenced him and all the other Castellammarese mafiosi to death. Once that kill order was put in place, everything just kind of ramps up. One more thing would happen before war would officially be announced, before we're hitting the mattresses, before this is officially we're at war. And that one thing that would happen all has to do with Milazzo. So what's going on in Detroit at this time? Gaspar Milazzo is leading the Detroit Mafia right now. And Masseria encouraged Chester Lemaire to eliminate Detroit's conservative mafia leadership and take control of Detroit, because he hates Gaspar Milazzo, so obviously he's gonna try to get somebody else to take Milazzo's spot. I'm pretty sure the first time I did this episode, I just kind of glazed over this, but it's been a really long time since I did this episode or the episode on Gaspar Milazzo. It was forever ago. So if you want to go check out the episode on Gaspar Milazzo, the quality is super shitty, but the information still stands. But instead of just glazing over this, because the first time that I did this video, it was kind of close to when I did the video about Gaspar Milazzo. So obviously I just glazed over it because I had already gone into it in full detail in the Gaspar Milazzo episode. But since it's been such a long time, I'm not going to glaze over it this time. I'm going to go fully into it so that we can kind of do a recap. Most people haven't seen my old videos, and I'm perfectly fine with that because the quality's very bad. So let's go over what happened with Gaspar Milazzo, because honestly, Gaspar Milazzo is probably one of my favorite mafia members of all time. Like, I really enjoyed doing the video about him. He was super loyal. He was the peacemaker of the group, and it's a real shame that he died the way that he did and how he did. I think the mafia would have been a much better place had he lived. And I want to go over everything that he did and his contributions and how his death pretty much kicked off the Castellammarese War. So first, let's talk about what happened between Gaspar Milazzo and Chester Lemaire. So as I said, Masseria approached Chester Lemaire and he tells him like, yo, you gotta take out the leadership in Detroit. I'll back you to be the boss in Detroit. I got you. If you take out Milazzo, you're the new boss. I'll make sure that happens. Just take him out. But why did he do that? He's this all-powerful mafioso. He's the capo di tutti i capi in New York City. Why couldn't he just put a hit out on Milazzo and have one of his own people do the job? Why does he have to reach out to Chester Lemaire and try to get him to take out Milazzo for him? Well, a lot like the situation with Stefano Magaddino, Joe the Boss Masseria had put out an order for Gaspar Milazzo to come and appear before him in New York City, but exactly like Stefano Magaddino, Gaspar Milazzo outright refused and did not show up. Milazzo was standing strong behind Joseph Aiello, and Joseph Aiello was currently at war with Al Capone. Aiello is a fellow Castellammarese, so obviously he's going to be the default choice for who Milazzo is going to throw his support behind for the leadership of the Chicago Mafia. Now, Joe the Boss Masseria was markedly not from Castellamare del Golfo. He was Sicilian. He was born in Menfi, which was an Agrigento province, but he grew up in Marsala, a Trapani province, all in Sicily. And that's a huge deal. And I'm honestly kind of surprised that Masseria threw his support behind Capone, and I think it was a lot more along the lines of like, I hate the Castellammarese clan so much that I'm gonna support any regime that's not from Castellamare. We all know who Al Capone was, but Capone was markedly not from Sicily. He was from Naples. One of Luciano's main gripes with Masseria was how much of a mustache Pete he was, how unwilling he was to work with anybody from anywhere other than his neat little circle in Sicily. And Luciano wanted to work with other people. He wanted to work with the Jews and the Russians. He wanted to work with people from all different backgrounds. And Masseria was not down with that. And that's why we saw the emergence of the Young Turks versus the Mustache Petes within the Castellammarese War. They hated being stifled and not being allowed to do business with anybody that wasn't Sicilian. So why would Joe the Boss Masseria choose to throw his support behind Capone, who's not Sicilian? It's because he hated the Castellammarese people so much that he was willing to support somebody that wasn't even Sicilian. Honestly, I think he would have thrown his support behind anybody else. Somebody that wasn't even Italian. Like, he hated them that much. So there's a war going on for the top spot in Chicago. One of them's Castellammarese, one of them's not. The one that's not is getting Joe Masseria's vote. So Joe the Boss Masseria, he reaches out to Gaspar Milazzo and he's like, hey, I don't like 𝐂𝐿𝐼. I can stand you. I don't love you because you're Castellammarese, but I could stand you. So here's the deal. I want to be friends. You can have an alliance with the 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐄𝐎 of New York City. We can form an empire together. All you have to do is kill your boy Joseph Aiello. Take out Aiello and we can be biffles. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. I will make you run the world. You just gotta kill him. It's that easy. And if you refuse, you die. Well, if there was one thing about Gaspar Milazzo is that he was not a wishy-washy dude. He supported who he supported. He rode 10 toes deep for his boys, and he was having none of this conversation. He knew how unlikely it was that Aiello was going to win this war that he was waging with Capone. Capone tripled Aiello in terms of manpower, in terms of earning power. Like, he was always going to lose this war, but that would not be due to Milazzo and his flip-flopping support. Absolutely not. He adamantly refused Joe the Boss Masseria's order, and he refused to go appear before him. He refused to carry out the hit that he was ordered to carry out, and that really, really offended Joe the Boss Masseria. Masseria has officially been named the Capo dei Tutti Capi. Who the hell is Gaspar Milazzo to refuse him? Are you kidding me? He was told to kill his friend. You don't get a choice when you're given that order from the Capo dei Tutti Capi. You just do it. On top of that, you add insult to injury and you don't even bother to appear when you're summoned? And to make matters even worse, Gaspar Milazzo is making it clear that he's throwing his support behind Salvatore Maranzano, who is currently about to wage full-blown war, intending to take that position of Capo dei Tutti Capi, a crown that Masseria had only just earned himself. Oh no, 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 that will not do. That cannot stand. You're done, bro. Like, absolutely not. So now, Masseria, he is heated, and he's out for blood. The leaders of New York, Philly, and Buffalo are all behind Aiello in Chicago and Maranzano in New York City. And Masseria is behind Capone in Chicago. And this is just kicking up a lot of dust in all the wrong places. Just like in Buffalo, we're a hairpin trigger away from all-out war. But Joe the Boss Masseria is not Stefano Magaddino. He did not spend his whole life not wanting to be boss. He spent his whole life fighting for that top spot. He wanted to be boss, and there was nothing that was going to stop him. So the fact that Maranzano is coming for his title, he's fighting until he dies for that top spot. So Masseria turns around and he's like, all right, you want to play? Let's play. Let's freaking play. You want to support somebody that I don't like? I'll support somebody you don't like, bitch. He finds someone else in Milazzo City, Chester Lemaire, that wanted the title of boss of the Detroit family. So Masseria starts all out hatching plans to assassinate both Gaspar Milazzo and Stefano Magaddino. Because in all reality, Joe the Boss Masseria is offended and embarrassed that Milazzo just gave him the finger, and he knows how close Gaspar Milazzo and Stefano Magaddino are. So that's why he's coming for Magaddino as hard as he is. The real enemy here is Gaspar Milazzo. Massaria's first action against Gaspar Milazzo was to back Cesar Chester Lemaire, a mafia figure in the Hamtramck neighborhood of Detroit, a former Sam Catalanote lieutenant, and a Milazzo associate. So Lemaire isn't just some stranger, like he's an associate of Milazzo's. But Lemaire was Milazzo's main rival in the city. So they're associates, but they ain't friends. And then the early 1930s hit, and Sam Catalanote, a top Detroit mafia boss, was killed. And after the death of Sam Catalanote, once again, the Detroit Mafia is experiencing a whole lot of unrest, rivalry, and conflict. Now, the Italian underworld in Detroit had gone through its own bloody power struggles all the way up until the mid-1910s. This is not a mafia family that was forged in peace. These guys fought to the death for their standing in the family. And the way that Detroit was set up was that territories had their own gangs. So like, okay, Angelo Mele, he's the boss of the East Side mob. So then there's a West Side mob. There's mafia families in Detroit for each territory. And Angelo Mele, the leader of the East Side Mafia, he gets a message from the leader of the West Side Mafia, Chet Lemaire. And the message is requesting a meeting to discuss mafia affairs and perhaps put an end to this feud that's going on. He doesn't want to fight anymore. And Mele is having none of it. He's like, do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm an idiot? Like, is that what's going on here? You think I'm the dumbest human being to ever be born? Absolutely not. Go screw yourself. I am not going to that meeting. You're out of your goddamn mind. Not going to happen. I'm not dumb. I've lived this long for a reason. I'm not going. But he doesn't want to tell him outright to go fuck himself. So what does he do? He goes to an intermediary. Gaspar Milazzo is a highly regarded member of the Detroit Mafia, and he's well known throughout the entire city for his mediation abilities. He is the person to go to if there's a beef and it's trying to be squashed. If both parties don't want to fight anymore, Gaspar Milazzo is the person that you hit up. He's the negotiator. He's the one that's going to settle the wars. So Mele, who doesn't want to beef anymore, but also doesn't want to go sit in the same room as Lemaire, he reasons that he can reach out to Milazzo, he can ask Milazzo to go in his place, and Lemaire wouldn't take offense to Milazzo going instead of him, because he would understand that Milazzo is well known for his negotiation skills. He's well known for his mediation abilities, and he doesn't think that Lemaire is going to be offended by Mele sending Milazzo in his place. Mele reaches out to Milazzo. He lets him know that he wants to mediate this dispute. He wants to squash the beef, and he asks him to go and represent him at the meeting. Now, what is not known at this time by Milazzo or Mele was that the powerful New York Mafia boss, Joe the Boss Masseria, the Capo dei Tutti Capi, began to support Chet Lemaire in his bid to take over the Detroit Mafia. Neither of these guys know this. And Gaspar Milazzo is boys with Mele. Like, Angelo Mele and Gaspar Milazzo, boys, okay? Biffles. They like each other. So, if either one of them had known that Chet Lemaire had Joe the Boss Masseria behind him, neither one of these guys would have made the moves that they made. They have no idea. Gaspar Milazzo is also super tight with the two right-hand men to Mele. Mele has two number twos figure. Like, these guys are on equal footing, and that's Joe Zerilli and Bill Tocco. And Gaspar Milazzo and Angelo Mele and Joe Zerilli and Bill Tocco, all boys. Totally cool, love each other. Now, it's slightly possible that Milazzo had been made aware that Masseria had Lemaire's back before he went to this meeting. Slightly possible. Very unlikely. It's very unlikely that had Milazzo been made aware that Masseria had Lemaire's back, that he would have gone to this meeting. So it's possible. I think it's been brought up as a possibility, but I highly doubt he had any idea. But there's rumors that a member of the Detroit Mafia had given Milazzo a heads up that Masseria was behind Lemaire. But again, I don't think that's true. I think that Milazzo had absolutely no idea that Masseria had anything to do with anything going on in Detroit. Either way, whether he knew or not, Milazzo agrees. He is biffles with melee, and he's like, yeah, absolutely, I'll take care of that for you. I've done this time and time and time again. I'm well known for my mediation abilities. Like, I got you. You're my boy. I'll take care of this for you. Now, either way, whether Milazzo had been tipped off or not, he looks at it like, listen, there's no way that Lemaire is going to risk going to war with the entire city of Detroit by making a move against me. So he agrees to sit down with Lemaire in place of Angela Bailey. He is of the full belief that there's no way that Lemaire's going to do anything against him in this meeting, because that's not something that people do. It's very lowbrow to ask someone to have a peace meeting and then attack them. Like, that's not a thing that happens, and they don't think that that's gonna happen. They don't think he's gonna risk a war, starting beef with two of the most powerful mafiosi in Detroit. For what? Like, they're not gonna assassinate them. That's not gonna happen. They know how much respect and support Lemaire would lose if he made any kind of move against these guys. They're just, doing their thing. They're gonna go. On May 31st, 1930, Gaspar the Peacemaker Milazzo and Sam Sasa Perino, Milazzo's right-hand man and driver, attended a meeting at the Verner Highway Fish Market in Detroit. And they attend this meeting in place of Angela Bailey and his associates, who had originally been asked to come and attend this meeting. Now, they're sitting down to eat their lunch, they're minding their business, they're waiting for Lemaire to come, and without comment or drama or pretty much anything, two gunmen leaped out and unleashed a barrage of shotgun blasts against Milazzo and Perino. The blasts would hit Milazzo in the head and kill him instantly. Sam Perino was hit in the chest, abdomen, and arm, and although he survived, he would die shortly after. Gaspar Milazzo was a very low-key and reserved mafia leader that was highly respected by pretty much everybody in the mafia. He died at the age of 43 years old with only 3 arrests under his belt and 0 convictions. And the arrests that he was arrested for was robbery and grand larceny. So he didn't even have any violent crimes against him. So now this thing that Milazzo had been convinced would absolutely not happen, he was like, no, there's no way Lemaire would ever risk attacking me. He knows that all-out war would ensue. He knows how bad he'd be fucked if he went near me. And it happened. And the reactions were exactly as Milazzo thought they would be. The entire mafia reacted with shock and outrage. The men that were closely aligned to Milazzo, such as Mele, Tocco, Zarilli, they called for vengeance. They wanted blood. This is all-out war. And they made it clear that they were determined to eliminate Lemaire and anybody who liked Lemaire. If you thought Lemaire was a halfway decent guy, you were dead. They wanted blood. They looked at the attack as disgraceful, and they wanted him and all of his associates dead for such an immoral attack on somebody who had been a friend to everybody that knew him. Everybody loved Gaspar Milazzo. Nobody ever met Gaspar Milazzo and was like, ugh, that guy was an asshole. Can't stand that guy. No, everybody loved this man. Even Lemaire. Lemaire had gone to other mafia territories in the past and reached out to Gaspar Milazzo to provide him safety in territories outside of Detroit. And Gaspar Milazzo had gone through that. He had made phone calls and ensured his protection on many occasions. So this murder is beyond comprehension to anybody that knew the situation. People are flabbergasted at this situation. They are heartbroken at the loss of Milazzo. They are heartbroken that this could happen. It's the worst thing that could ever happen. Now, in this day and age, a lot of crime historians look back and they think that Milazzo had actually taken the place of boss of the Detroit family after 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 had died. But he died only 3 months after 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏, so whether he was the boss or not, I think at this point is kind of irrelevant because he hadn't been the boss for very long if he was the boss. But at the end of the day, assume this man is powerful. This is one of the most powerful men in Detroit. And the senseless murder when he was just going to mediate a dispute is just beyond comprehension. There's other crime historians that say that Milazzo never took the position of boss of the family, and that actually, when 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 died, it was Chet Lemaire that took the position of boss of Detroit. But that all came to an end when Chet Lemaire went after Milazzo. Lemaire's closest associates and supporters unleashed a wave of violence against Lemaire and his entire faction, and the entire thing was decimated within a year, with over 14 murders. Lemaire himself would be betrayed and murdered by his own men less than a year after Gaspar Milazzo's murder. And here you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We are officially in the Castellammarese War. There's a lot of debate over what particular murder kicked up the Castellammarese War. Nobody's 100% sure exactly what murder did it and started the war, but it's very, very likely that it was Milazzo. There was another death that some people say is what actually started the war, and that was the death of Reina. Personally, I think it was Gaspar Milazzo, because people were hurt. People were pissed when Gaspar Milazzo was killed, and rightly so. There was no reason for that man to die. And as I said when I started talking about Gaspar Milazzo, I really think that the entire mafia would have been a better place had Gaspar Milazzo lived and helped to shape it. So it's really sad to see how things played out. But okay, cool. Detroit is handled. Milazzo is dead. Lemaire is officially the boss. Let's move on from there. Because let's be clear here, and let's be honest, Joe the Boss Masseria is just getting started. This is not the end to the bloodshed, it's the beginning. The Castellammarese War is just getting started with the murder of Gaspar Milazzo, and it would prove to be probably the bloodiest mafia war in all of American history. So now that Detroit is handled, Masseria turns his sights to Brooklyn, and he orders the boss of the Castellammarese clan in Brooklyn, Niccolo Schiro, to pay a $10,000 back payment and step down as the boss of his faction. And he does. Schiro is not willing to fight for that position of boss of the family. He puts in place a successor, Vito Bonventre, and Vito Bonventre was murdered on July 15th, 1930. Now, do you remember Vito Bonventre? I actually mentioned him a few times in part 1 and 2. He was a member of the Good Killers, and he ended up going down with Magaddino for the 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏 murder. Now, obviously, this means that Magaddino is pissed. He is mad. He is upset at the loss of Bonventre. And honestly, when I heard that Schiro was forced to step down and that he put Vito Bonventre in place as his successor, I was kind of surprised that Joe the Boss Masseria allowed this to happen. Bonventre would have been just as tight with the guys that Masseria is fighting. He would have been just as tight with everybody as Schiro, Milazzo, and Magaddino all would have been. Why would he allow him to take the place as the boss? But this is why. He fully planned to have Bonventre killed, and Masseria replaced him with Giuseppe Perino. I want to say that Giuseppe Perino is related to Sam Perino, the one that was murdered with Gaspar Milazzo. I'm almost certain that he was his brother. I remember, I'm trying to remember, but I remember there being a situation where Giuseppe Perino turned around and supported Masseria regardless of the fact that Masseria had his brother killed. I'm pretty sure, I'm 99.999% sure that that situation did play out, that Giuseppe Perino turned around and all but told Masseria, I don't care that you killed my brother. Fuck him, he deserved to die. That's okay though, because Perino would be gunned down, most likely by his own men, while eating dinner in a restaurant on January 19th, 1931. So man did not last long. On April 15th, 1931, so about 3-4 months after Perino was killed, the Castellammarese War comes to an end after Masseria's top lieutenant, Lucky Luciano, betrayed him and decided to work with Salvatore Maranzano and have Joe the Boss Masseria killed at a restaurant in Coney Island. I do have videos on Joe the Boss Masseria and Lucky Luciano, so if you're interested in that whole story, there's a lot that goes into that. I'll link those 2 videos as well, but we're just gonna leave it there. Lucky Luciano set up Joe the Boss Masseria to die. Now, after Masseria's death, Salvatore Maranzano, who is besties with Stefano Magaddino, declared himself as the capo di tutti i capi. As soon as he takes control, he puts in place the 5 families, and he names himself the boss of bosses and the boss of one of those 5 families. And he picks the family that belonged to Schiro. So the one that had Schiro as the boss, and then when Schiro stepped down, he left Vito Bonventre as his successor. Vito Bonventre was killed. When Vito Bonventre was killed, Giuseppe Perino stepped in, and then there was an insurrection and killed Perino. That family doesn't have a boss. Maranzano steps in and says, okay, I'm the capo di tutti i capi, but I'm also going to be the boss of this family because this family doesn't have a boss. And it's the Castellammarese faction, that's his boys. Of course he wants that family. He names Stefano Magaddino's cousin, Joseph Bonanno, as the underboss, and he names Stefano Magaddino himself as the new consigliere. Alright guys, so now that we've gotten to the death of Joe the Boss Masseria, I feel like this is a good place to end the episode. We got through a ton of information, and I don't want you guys to lose interest because this whole time period is so jam-packed with crazy shit going on in the Mafia as well as Stefano Magaddino's family and life that I still have a ton left to go over, and there's definitely going to be another part, so I want to end this episode here. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, follow, do all the things, and I'll see you next week for part 5 of Stefano Magaddino. Bye!